All right, so you're thinking about buying your beef in bulk. So I'm sure you're like everyone else. First couple times you do this, you're gonna have a million questions. How much meat is it? How much is it gonna cost? What kind of cuts am I gonna get? Well, here's Stringer Bridge Farm. Selling beef in bulk is what we do. So I'm gonna go through this, and today we picked up 3 animals from the butcher. So it's a perfect time to go through and answer most of those questions. We're gonna look at the cuts and what we got. We're gonna maybe take a peek at what the animal looked like. Hopefully answer any other questions about the process that you might have. So let's get into it.
So obviously there's tons of variability in the size of the animal. So what I'm gonna do here is kind of what I would consider the average for a moderate sized animal. So this steer, I estimated the live weight to be about 1,000 pounds. It was a 2.5-year-old animal, and we had been feeding it grain for about 3.5 months prior to processing it. So my best estimate was 1,000 pounds live weight, and everything that you get when you're buying an animal from a farm like this, everything is going to be based off of the carcass weight. So you could see on this paper, this was a 1,000-pound animal, and the dress weight was 498 pounds. So that's not too far from what I typically see. So from live animal, they basically kill the animal, skin it, gut it, remove the head and feet, and then they weigh it. And that is what is called the carcass weight, the dressed weight. Some people call it a hot carcass weight, something like that. But that is what all your pricing is going to be built off of. So for me as the farmer, I'm going to charge you based on that carcass weight or dressed weight, and the butcher's fees are going to be built around that carcass weight. So for this one, you could see 498 pounds at 85 cents a pound plus a couple of little fees, and the total cost is $423 for half of this animal. Another big question everybody has is how much volume does this animal take up? So obviously somebody's got to pick it up from the butcher. For us, our butcher is more than an hour away, so I don't like to make my customers go all that way. So I think it's kind of a benefit for the customer and for the butcher, so I can stay in his good graces, that I just go pick them all up and deliver them to the customers. So right here, this is what half of that 1,000-pound steer looks like. So this is 2 70-quart coolers and a 100-quart cooler, and they're all 3 very much full with half of a cow. And volume-wise, so that's what it takes to transport half of an animal. If you were to go pick it up by yourself, you're probably going to need about, this is 200 and something quarts, but you always want to have a little bit extra. So I always tell people about 250 quarts if it's a 1,000-pound animal is usually enough coolers to get the animal in. Now the other thing is for freezer space, this is going to be about 8 to 10 cubic feet in your freezer. So if you have, like most people around here, have the biggest upright freezer you can get, which is like a 21 to 23 cubic foot. So basically you're taking up almost half of a large upright freezer, or maybe a slightly less if you have a chest freezer, because it can stack a little bit better and not have all the loss from the shelves. But basically plan on half of a full-size upright freezer. So one other thing to keep in mind is that even though the carcass weight of this animal is 498 pounds, you're not going to take home that amount of beef. Your losses are going to come in 2 forms. So one is they're going to age the animal. Usually somewhere around 2 weeks is probably the average. And in those 2 weeks, you have some moisture loss. And then the other thing is you're going to have some trim losses. And depending on how you get all your cuts cut, some of them are going to be bone in, some are going to be boneless, some people want it trimmed, some people want their ground meat with all the fat, some people want lean ground meat. So all those things are going to factor into the actual weight of the animal you bring home versus what you pay for. So now we're going to go through, we're going to weigh, I'm not going to go through every single cut, but we're going to weigh our steaks, our roasts, our ground meat, some of our other cuts, like we get soup bones and things like that. You're going to get heart and liver potentially, or any other organs you may want. So we're going to go through right now, we're going to look at how much of each of those cuts we got off of this animal and what the total is. All right. So this first one we got, this is roast and brisket, and this customer didn't get a whole lot of roast. So like I said, it's going to vary a little bit how you get everything cut, but let's see what we got here.
43 pounds. I may come across a few more as we go through it, but for now we're going to stick with that. So in this lineup we had chuck roast, we had brisket, rump roast, heel roast, and loin roast. So those are some of the options you can get in roast. Let's go through and we'll get some steaks. Okay, so we got a lot of steaks. Julie. So we got a lot of steaks, so I'm gonna have to do a couple loads of these and we'll add them up. So we got 42 pounds on the first load. And here we have ribeye steaks, sirloin steaks, T-bone steaks, a flank steak, T-bones, round steak, 7 steaks, T-bone steaks, T-bone, T-bone, shoulder round steaks, shoulder round steaks, and more round steaks. So rounds are something you can get cut into roast, ground meat, shoulder, steaks, ground meat, or roast. Sorry. Let's get the rest of those steaks. All right, so this is the last of the steaks. All right, so it's 47 pounds, and it's mostly a mixture of all the same steaks already listed. Let's lay them out here so we can get a good look at what it all looks like. Okay, now we have bones. This is very popular. A lot of people love to keep soup bones for making soups and doing different things. This lady, she wanted all the soup bones she could have, so they've got a couple different styles. Some of them are whole bones, and some of them are slices of bones. So we'll see how much weight we got on that. Okay. $35 pounds. And some people do and some people don't count the bones in their yield. This is kind of one of the heavier loads of bones I've seen. So you can either count them or not if you want in your yield. It's really up to you. You see, these are the soup bones that they slice the bones up and they leave a little bit of meat on them. When you cook them down to make broth or something, you get the marrow, the bone, and a little bit of meat or sinew, and it works out really good for what people like for making their broth. And the last thing we have left is, actually we got 2 things. We got a liver. She wanted the liver. And then we have ground meat. All right, so we've got most of a cooler full of ground meat, so I'm gonna cheat on this. Let's weigh one ice chest empty first. 14 pounds. Then we're gonna weigh the full one. Oh, instead of taking it all out. So 56 minus 14, 42 pounds. All right, so that's what you get from a cow. I'll show you the cut sheet so you can get a little review of it. So if you look, we have about half of the cooler, of 70 quart cooler, full of 1 pound packs of ground meat. We went through all these different cuts. We got the weights on them, on kind of the groups of cuts, not each individual. And then we had the soup bones and liver and things like that. So obviously I did this with non-certified scales, so this isn't exact numbers. But you can see basically
if my estimate was close, 1,000 pounds, the dress weight of 500 would be pretty close to what I've typically seen, about 50%. Sometimes you'll see a little bit higher, but in general, about 50% if your butcher is actually removing the head and all when they weigh it. And so what you could see is, you know, your steaks made up about 50 pounds, the roast for 43 pounds, ground meat 42 pounds. You can get some other cuts like liver, heart, your flank steaks, some of those that don't fit in a normal category. And then we had the bones at 35 pounds. Now some people don't count the bones in their yield, some people do. But if you count them in the yield, if you bought half of a steer, then you get basically what she's taking home is 211 pounds of product, which would give us about 85% yield off the carcass weight. If you don't count the bones, you're looking at 177 pounds, which would be 71%. Now, when it comes to packaging, there are two main options. One is what you saw here, which is freezer paper. So they double wrap freezer paper. And that's what I prefer and what I typically try to talk people into, versus you can get your meat vacuum sealed. So when it's double freezer paper wrap like this, we've had it stay good for like 2 to 3 years. I've never actually pulled any out that was freezer burnt. So I think the longest we had was 3 years, and it was still perfectly fine with 0 freezer burn. Now they do the double wrap and they have a flash freezer, so the meat's frozen very rapidly. Now vacuum sealer, the problems I've run into is basically the bags, one tiny puncture on the bag where you can get some air in there and the meat will start freezer burning. And when you're talking about bone-in cuts and things like that, or just the meat, you know, getting banged around by moving it, I would say you probably end up with 10 or 12% of your bags that get leaks. And once they get leaks, the meat goes bad very fast, versus it lasts almost forever in the freezer paper. Now the disadvantage of the freezer paper is you can't see the cuts per se. So, you know, when you're buying beef in bulk, you get kind of the end cuts as well as the prime cuts. So sometimes you take 2 T-bones out and one of them's towards the end and it's pretty small and maybe you wanted more. So it can be kind of aggravating, but I think the costs and the benefits are definitely better for the freezer paper versus vacuum sealer. So hopefully this helps you. If you have more questions, you can definitely leave me a comment, and I love answering questions in the comment section from you guys. Another thing is, one of these animals we kept was a bull, a young bull that we were possibly keeping to breed, but we decided to butcher him because he wasn't turning out exactly like we wanted. And I know a lot of people always ask me about the quality of bulls for processing. So we did get one processed. We're keeping it for ourselves. So I think I'm gonna do a video on the quality of the meat we got from that bull. So stay tuned, and within the next week or two, we're gonna make a video on the quality of the meat we got from that bull.